3,000 years ago, a nation built a box that it believed could kill, not a metaphor. A wooden chest, precisely 2.5 cubits long, about 3 3/4 feet, the length of a child, overlaid inside and out with pure gold, crowned with 2 winged figures of hammered gold facing each other across its lid. The people who made it would not touch it with their bare hands. They carried it on poles, threaded through golden rings, so that human skin never met its surface, and when one man reached out to steady it as it wobbled, the texts say he fell dead on the spot. This is the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred, most feared, most sought-after object in the history of the Western world, and roughly 26 centuries ago, it vanished from the face of the earth, and no one, in all the time since, has ever proven where it went. Picture the scene the ancient writers describe. An object so dangerous, it was kept in a windowless inner room. No one was allowed to enter, no one, except a single high priest, one day a year, and even he approached it wrapped in ritual and dread, half expecting not to walk back out. An object that armies carried before them into battle, that the texts credit with collapsing city walls and stopping a river mid-flow. An object that, when a rival people captured it and set it beside their own god, left that god shattered on the floor by morning, and their city stricken with plague until they begged to give it back. And then, after centuries at the burning center of a nation's faith, it is simply gone. No record of its destruction. No entry in the meticulous inventories of the empire that sacked its home. Nothing. The single most important artifact of the ancient Near East does not get destroyed in the histories. It does not get captured. It disappears. So the question that has driven prophets, kings, archaeologists, and treasure hunters to the ends of the earth for 2,500 years is brutally simple. Where did it go? And the darker question underneath it, the one whispered in the old accounts themselves, what was actually inside it, and why did the people who knew treat opening it as the last thing a human being would ever do? Let me be honest with you right now, before we take one more step, because this is exactly the kind of story that gets twisted into a lie, and I will not do that to you. No one in modern times has verifiably found the Ark of the Covenant. No confirmed hand has lifted its lid on camera. No proven discovery has ever been authenticated to the world. Anyone who tells you flatly that it was dug up last year and opened and something crawled out is selling you a story with no evidence behind it. That is not what this is. What this is stranger, and harder, and far more real. Because the Ark is not only a legend, it sits at the crossroads of history and scripture and archaeology, described in extraordinary, almost engineering-grade detail, credited across multiple independent ancient sources with lethal power, and then removed from the historical record so cleanly that scholars still argue about how it was even possible. And there are places on Earth right now, guarded, sealed, watched over by men who have given their entire lives to the task, where people swear it still exists, and swear that no one living will ever be allowed to look inside. Stay with me. Do not skip ahead. Because when you walk through what the oldest texts actually say the Ark was, and what it did, and how it vanished, you arrive at a mystery that the comfortable explanation cannot hold. And once you see the shape of it, you cannot unsee it. First, though, the official story. And it deserves to be told carefully and fairly, because it is the work of serious scholars across centuries, and it is not stupid. Here is the mainstream account, assembled from the Hebrew Bible, from archaeology, and from the comparative study of the ancient Near East. The Ark of the Covenant was the central cult object of ancient Israel, a portable shrine, built, according to the book of Exodus, at the foot of Sinai to an exacting divine specification. Acacia wood, gold within and gold without. A solid gold cover called the mercy seat, and upon it 2 cherubim, not chubby infants, but the fearsome winged guardians of the ancient imagination, their wings arched over the space between them. And that empty space, scholars explain, was the point. In the theology of ancient Israel, the Ark was the footstool, or the throne, of an invisible God who, unlike every neighboring deity, was never to be depicted, so that the holiest object in the religion was built to frame an emptiness where the divine presence was said to dwell. Picture every other great temple of that world, each with its statue of a god at the center stone, or bronze, or gold, a face to worship. Now picture a people who built the same grand sanctum, the same golden inner room, and placed at the heart of it a throne with no figure on it. a seat deliberately left empty, and declared that the emptiness itself was where their god was enthroned. That absence at the center of everything was the most radical religious idea of its age. Inside the chest, the texts say, lay the 2 stone tablets of the law, the covenant itself, which is where the object gets its name, and the mainstream has sober, careful readings for everything about it. The deadly power? These are theological narratives. Scholars say stories told to encode the absolute holiness of the object and the terror of the sacred, the lesson that the divine is not safe, not tame, not to be handled casually. The elaborate handling rules, the poles, the prohibition on touch, the single priest once a year, these are the logical architecture of holiness in an ancient culture. The concentric rings of restricted access that surrounded anything believed to carry the presence of a god. And the disappearance? The simplest answer, and a perfectly reasonable one, in 587 or 586 BCE, the armies of Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem, broke it, burned the Temple of Solomon to the ground, and carried off its treasures. The ark, in this reading, was almost certainly looted and melted down for its gold, or destroyed in the fire, its wood consumed, its precious metal poured into an imperial treasury and lost forever. No mystery required, just the ordinary, brutal erasure of war. This is a strong and honest explanation, and I want you to hold on to your respect for it, because I am not here to tear it down. Most historians hold some version of it, and they hold it for good reasons. The ark was sacred, the temple was destroyed. Sacred things are destroyed when temples burn. But there is one detail inside that clean account that has troubled scholars for a very long time. And it does not get smaller the more you look at it. It gets larger. Here is the crack. The Babylonians were bureaucrats of plunder. When they stripped the Temple of Solomon, the biblical historians recorded the hall in almost obsessive detail, the bronze pillars broken up for their metal, the great bronze basin, the pots, the shovels, the snuffers, the basins, the fire pans, the gold and the silver vessels, counted and carried to Babylon. The record of what was taken from that temple is specific down to the serving implements, and the Ark of the Covenant, the single most sacred and most valuable object in the entire building, the golden heart of the whole religion, is not on the list. It is not recorded as captured. It is not recorded as destroyed. In the very texts that inventory the bronze shovels, the holiest treasure in the nation's history simply is not mentioned. How do you loot the most important temple in your empire's conquests and fail to note that you took its crown jewel? There are only 2 answers. Either the record is incomplete in the one place it is most detailed, or the ark was not there to take. And if it was not there in 586 BCE, then someone had already moved it. Pull that thread, because it leads somewhere the official story does not want to go. Pull the first thread, the specifications. Read the description of the ark in Exodus, and what strikes you is not its mysticism, but its precision. This is not the vague language of myth. It is closer to a blueprint. Exact dimensions, given in cubits, to the half-cubit. The materials specified layer by layer, this wood, this metal, this thickness of overlay, gold on the inside and gold on the outside both. The rings placed at the 4 feet, the poles fitted through them, and a standing instruction that the poles were never to be removed, so the object could always be lifted and moved without a hand ever touching the chest itself. Think about what that last rule implies. You do not build a permanent do-not-touch protocol around a symbol. You build it around a hazard. When we handle something today with tools that keep it always at arm's length, never skin to surface, we are almost always handling something that can hurt us. So why did a Bronze Age people wrap their holiest object in the exact handling logic we reserve for things that burn, or poison, or worse? What did they believe would happen if flesh met gold? The texts do not treat the danger as symbolic. They treat it as operational, a real rule for a real risk. But a hazard is only half of what these accounts say the object was, because they also describe it doing something no ordinary chest in the ancient world was ever said to do. They describe it speaking. Pull the second thread, the voice. Look closely at what the 2 golden cherubim on the lid are actually for. They are not decoration, and the texts are explicit about this. The figures were made facing each other, wings arched forward, so that their wingtips nearly met above the center of the lid, and the accounts say that the divine voice issued from precisely that spot, from the empty air in the gap between the wings, above the mercy seat, between the cherubim. That was the appointed place of contact, not the sky, not a mountain, a specific engineered volume of empty space, a few feet across, framed by two golden forms on the top of a golden box. From there, the texts say, instructions came, from there, answers came. Sit with the strangeness of that as a piece of design. They did not simply build a container for sacred tablets. They built a container, and then they built, on top of it, a carefully shaped structure whose entire stated function was to mark the exact point in space where a voice from beyond would be heard. Think about the only kinds of objects we build that way. An antenna is a shape engineered to catch something invisible traveling from far away, to concentrate it at a single point where it can be received. A receiver is a device tuned to pull a signal out of empty air. Why would a Bronze Age people design a precise geometry, two facing figures, a defined gap, a fixed focal point as the specified location where communication with an unseen intelligence takes place? What did they think was arriving in that gap? And why did the same object that was said to receive a voice also have to be carried on poles, never touched, kept in the dark, and approached by one man a year on pain of death? A thing that speaks, a thing that kills. Both descriptions of the same golden box in the same texts. Hold that contradiction. Because the accounts of what it did to the people who came too close are next, and they are worse. Pull the third thread, the deaths. The accounts of what the ark did to people are not scattered or vague. They form a grim, consistent pattern. When the ark was being moved on a cart and the oxen stumbled, a man named Uzzah reached out his hand to steady it, an instinctive, well-meant gesture, and, the text says, he died at once, struck down for the touch. When the Philistines captured the ark and placed it in the temple of their god Dagon, they found the idol the next morning fallen on its face, and the morning after that fallen and broken, its head and hands severed at the threshold. And the people of that city, and the cities the ark was moved to after, were struck with a devastating affliction, tumors. A plague that spread from town to town until, in terror, they built a special cart and sent the ark away, loaded with gold offerings, just to be rid of it. And when it returned to Israelite territory, the men of one town looked into it, looked inside, and the text records that a great number of them were struck dead for it. Sit with the shape of that, an object that kills the man who touches it to help, an object that shatters a rival god and plagues a city, an object that strikes people down for the act of looking inside. Read as theology, it is a lesson in holiness. Read as description, it is something else, an account of a thing so dangerous that the people around it learned, through death after death, the rules for keeping it at bay. Notice, too, that the danger in these accounts does not care who you are. It strikes the enemy who captures it and the devout man who tries to help it alike. It is not moral. It is closer to physical, a hazard that responds to proximity and contact, not to intention. What were they actually describing? And whatever it was, why has no one been able to find it? Because that is the part that turns dread into genuine mystery. Pull the fourth thread, the clean vanishing. Follow the ark forward through the history and watch it go quiet. It leads Israel across the Jordan and around the walls of Jericho. It moves from place to place, captured and returned, until King David brings it to Jerusalem and King Solomon installs it in the inner sanctum of the great temple he builds, the Holy of Holies, a perfect windowless cube of a room, sheathed in gold, entered by no one but the high priest once a year. And then, across the centuries that follow, the ark is mentioned less and less, until it is barely mentioned at all, and by the time Babylon comes, it is already a kind of silence at the center of the story. After the destruction, when the exiles return and build the Second Temple decades later, the Holy of Holies at its heart is, by multiple accounts, empty. The most sacred room in the rebuilt religion contained nothing. Centuries later, when a Roman general forced his way into that inner sanctum expecting to find the legendary treasure of the Jews, the accounts say he found an empty room and was baffled by it. The throne of the invisible God sat vacant, because the object that framed the emptiness was already gone. So the ark did not vanish in the smoke of 586. It had slipped out of view before that quietly, without a recorded moment of loss. Imagine a crown jewel that is not stolen in a dramatic heist, but simply, at some unrecorded hour, stops being in the vault, and no one can say when the vault went empty. That is the disappearance of the Ark. Not a bang, a slow fade to nothing. And into that silence, the theories rush. Pull the fifth thread, the competing fates. Here is what should unsettle you most. It is not that we have no explanation for where the Ark went. It is that we have too many, each from a different ancient source, each insistent, and none of them agreeing. One tradition, preserved in an old text, says that the prophet Jeremiah, warned of the coming destruction, took the ark and the altar of incense and hid them in a cave in the mountain from which Moses had once looked out over the promised land, and sealed the entrance and declared the place would remain unknown until God gathered his people again. Another trail points to Egypt, to a pharaoh who, generations before Babylon, is recorded raiding Jerusalem and stripping the temple's treasures, and who could, some argue, have carried the ark south. Another says it was hidden in a chamber deep beneath the Temple Mount itself, in tunnels sealed under the holiest and most contested ground on earth, where no excavation is permitted to this day. And another simply holds that Babylon took it after all, and it was melted into anonymous gold. 4 fates, 4 destinations, a cave, a foreign empire, a sealed chamber underground, a furnace. Everyone agrees the ark vanished. No 2 traditions agree on how. When a single object generates that many confident, incompatible accounts of its disappearance, it tells you something, that it mattered enough for many peoples to claim its ending, and that the truth was already lost so early that each culture had to invent its own. But one of those trails does not end in antiquity. One of them leads to a place you can travel to right now, where the claim is not that the ark was lost, but that it is kept. Pull the 6th thread, the guarded relic. In the highlands of Ethiopia, in the ancient city of Axum, stands a church, and within its precincts, a chapel where an unbroken tradition, centuries deep, holds that the true Ark of the Covenant resides to this day. The account, told in Ethiopia's national epic, is that the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon, that their son carried the ark from Jerusalem to Africa long ago, and that it has been protected there ever since. And here is the detail that stops the breath. The Ark of Axum is watched over by a single man, a monk, chosen for the task, who by tradition never leaves the sacred enclosure for the rest of his life, and who alone is permitted to see the object. No one else, not priests, not scholars, not kings, not the faithful who venerate it. When that guardian grows old, he names his successor, and the watch passes on, and the object is never shown. For generation after generation, one pair of eyes at a time has been the only human contact with whatever is inside that chapel. Think about the totality of that. A relic guarded so absolutely that its own custodians accept a life of confinement to keep it, and its own religion accepts that no one but the keeper will ever look. Whatever is in that chapel, and the tradition is held with complete sincerity by millions, is treated exactly the way the ancient texts said the ark must be treated, unseen, untouched, approached by one, and forbidden to all. What is being guarded there with such total devotion, and why, in 3,000 years, has the answer been kept behind a single set of eyes? Hold all 6 threads together now, the blueprint, the voice, the deaths, the clean vanishing, the 4 fates, the eternal guardian. Because when you line them up, the story you were told turns inside out. Here is the thing that inverts the whole account, the realization that turns a lost relic into something far stranger. We are taught to imagine the ark's disappearance as an accident, a casualty of war, swept away in the chaos of a burning city, lost the way things are lost when empires collapse. Random, passive, a victim of history. But run the evidence the other way, and a different shape emerges, and it is deliberate. Look again at the sequence. The ark goes quiet in the record long before Babylon arrives. The Holy of Holies is already empty by the time anyone thinks to check. Multiple traditions independently describe not a theft, but a hiding a prophet sealing it in a cave, a chamber prepared beneath the mount, a journey to a distant land for safekeeping. The common thread across the incompatible stories is not that the ark was seized. It is that the ark was removed, on purpose, by people who saw catastrophe coming and acted to put the most dangerous, most sacred object they possessed beyond the reach of the coming enemy. The disappearance was not the failure of the Guardians. It may have been their final, successful act. Read that again, because it flips everything. The Ark is not missing because someone lost it. The Ark may be missing because someone hid it so well that 26 centuries of the most motivated searching in human history has not found it. And that is a completely different kind of mystery. A thing lost by accident wants to be found. A thing hidden by design does not. Think of the difference between a coin that slips down the back of a couch and a body buried by someone who does not want it discovered. The first surfaces eventually, the world jostles it loose. The second can stay hidden for as long as the care that hid it holds for centuries, for millennia, forever. The Ark does not behave like the coin. It behaves like the second thing, something placed, deliberately, by people who understood exactly what they were protecting it from. The very fact that no empire, no archaeologist, no treasure hunter has ever produced it is not evidence that it was destroyed. It may be evidence of how good the concealment was and of how many people, across how many centuries, have been willing to keep it. So which is the real story, the passive loss we were taught, or a deliberate concealment older and more disciplined than any secret we know? A single hidden object you could dismiss. But the Ark is not a single case. The impulse behind it is everywhere. A single vanished relic you could set aside. One lost box, however sacred history loses things. Except the Ark is not an isolated anomaly. It is the most famous example of a pattern that runs through the whole human story, and once you see the pattern, the single case stops looking like an accident at all. Consider what surrounds the Ark's own disappearance. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, the ancient library hidden in desert caves near the shore of that salt sea, and found in the 20th century, there is one scroll unlike all the others. It is not written on parchment or papyrus. It is engraved on thin sheets of copper, and it is not scripture. It is a list. A detailed inventory of enormous quantities of gold and silver and sacred treasure, hidden. The scroll says, in dozens of specific locations across the land buried under this hill, sealed in that cistern, walled into a particular tomb. A treasure map, carved into metal so it would survive, pointing to a vast hoard of concealed temple wealth that, to this day, has never been conclusively found. The people of that time and place were hiding their most precious and sacred things, deliberately, systematically, against the day the conquerors came. The Ark, in that light, is not a freak event. It is the crown of a whole civilization's instinct to bury its holiest objects beyond the reach of empire, and the pattern does not stop there. Across cultures and continents, humanity returns again and again to the same idea, the sacred object that must not be seen. The relic kept behind veils and walls and vows, the thing whose power is bound to its concealment, whose danger is bound to its exposure. And into that same ancient pattern step the modern claimants, the treasure hunters and amateurs who have announced, more than once, that they alone have found the Ark, in a chamber beneath Jerusalem, in a cave, in a hidden vault. I have to be honest with you, none of those modern claims has ever been verified. Not one has produced the object for authentication. They dissolve every time into assertion without proof. But the fact that people keep claiming it, keep searching, keep digging beneath the holiest ground on earth, tells you the pull of this object has not weakened in 3,000 years. A single lost relic you could dismiss, a civilization built to hide its sacred things, a treasure map in copper, a world that keeps searching, and a church that keeps guarding that is not an accident. That is a fingerprint. The question is what it points to. So what is the answer? Here is where I have to be honest with you, because the honesty is the whole point, and anyone who hands you a clean, thrilling ending is selling you something. There are several real possibilities for the fate of the Ark, and I am going to lay them out plainly, and none of them lets you close the book. Possibility 1, the mundane one, and the one many historians favor, it is gone. Destroyed or melted down when Babylon burned Jerusalem in 586 BCE. Its silence in the loot inventories nothing more than the ordinary incompleteness of ancient records, its wood turned to ash, and its gold turned to anonymous bullion 26 centuries ago. In this reading there is no chamber to find, no relic to open, only a hole in history where the most sacred object of the ancient world used to be. It is the deflating answer, and it may well be the true one. But notice what it still cannot explain away: the early silence, the empty sanctum before the fire, the traditions of deliberate hiding that predate the destruction. Possibility 2. It was hidden, and it endures. That the traditions of concealment are true in their bones, that faithful hands moved the ark before the catastrophe and sealed it in a cave, or beneath the Temple Mount, in a place chosen precisely because it would never be found, and that it is still there, in the dark, exactly where they left it, waiting under the most fought-over ground on the planet. Possibility 3, it is in Axum. That the Ethiopian tradition, held with total sincerity for centuries, is simply correct that the Ark, or something the keepers have always believed to be the Ark, sits in that guarded chapel right now, watched by a single monk who will die without ever having let another human being see it. That the answer is not lost at all, only kept. And possibility 4, the one that quietly unsettles the scholars most, that the Ark, as the texts describe it, in all its lethal and specific glory, was never quite the physical object we imagine, that layers of memory and theology and awe accreted over the centuries around something that has been transformed in the telling, until the box we are all searching for is partly a creation of the searching itself. I am not going to choose for you, because the honest truth is that no one can. But I will tell you what does not fit. The comfortable story, a holy box, lost in a fire, end of mystery, cannot account for the record that inventories the shovels and forgets the crown jewel, cannot account for the sanctum that was empty before the flames, cannot account for the fact that 3,000 years of the most driven searching on Earth has never produced a single authenticated splinter of it. And the thing we are almost afraid to say out loud is not that something terrible is sealed in a box. It is quieter and heavier than that. It is that a civilization's most sacred, most feared, most meticulously documented object can vanish so completely and stay vanished so perfectly that we cannot even agree whether it was destroyed, hidden, carried to Africa, or dissolved into legend, and that the not knowing has lasted longer than almost any empire that ever tried to find it. So now it is yours, and I mean that I read every one of these. When you sit with everything laid out, which is it? Was the Ark destroyed in the fall of Jerusalem, gone for 26 centuries, a hole in history and nothing more? Was it hidden on purpose before the end, and does it still lie sealed in a cave or beneath the Temple Mount, waiting? Is it in Axum right now, real and guarded, watched by one man sworn to silence? Or has the object itself been remade by 3,000 years of awe into something we will never quite find, because it is no longer only a thing? Tell me in the comments 1, 2, 3, or 4, and tell me why. I want to watch you argue it out, because the people in the comments on this channel catch things I miss every single time. And if the ground shifted under you even slightly in the last few minutes, if the most famous relic in the world suddenly feels less like a lost antique and more like a secret someone is still keeping, then subscribe and turn on the bell so you are standing in the room the moment the next one drops. Because the Ark is not the only sacred thing that was deliberately hidden before the empires came. That copper scroll in the desert still lists treasures no one has ever found, buried under hills and sealed in cisterns across the Holy Land, and the newest searches are already circling one of those locations right now. When we follow that map, the story of what was hidden and by whom and why does not just deepen. It opens. I want you here when it does. One last thing, said quietly, because it matters and I will not pretend otherwise. Everything you just heard is an exploration of theories, traditions, and open questions, not a verdict. The Ark of the Covenant is described in real texts, its disappearance is a genuine and unresolved historical puzzle, and the traditions surrounding it, the hiding, the guarding, the searching, are real. But the Ark has never, in modern times, been verifiably found, authenticated, or opened. Whether it still exists, whether it ever existed exactly as the oldest accounts describe, and where it might be, are all genuinely unknown, and honest people, historians, archaeologists, and believers alike disagree. No monster came out of a box. What did not come out across 3,000 years is a single confirmed answer. And that absence, that perfect and enduring silence where the holiest object of the ancient world should be, is the real thing worth sitting with. Sit with it. And I will see you at the next search.